It is the 6th of September, 1945. The war in Europe has been over for 4 months. And out over the grey water of the English Channel, heading toward the coast of England, is a flying machine that should not exist. It has no long wings. It has no propeller on its nose. Instead, 2 enormous rotors spin on outriggers, one on each side of a fat, stubby body, beating the air with a sound the people below have never heard before. Inside sits a German crew. They are flying a Nazi aircraft straight into the heart of the country that just defeated them. And when they touch down on English soil, they will have done something no one in history has ever done. They will have crossed the English Channel in a helicopter. This is the Focke-Achgelis Fa-223 Drache, and the strangest thing about it is not that it crossed the channel. It is that Germany had a working transport helicopter at all, and almost no one knew. To understand how a German helicopter ended up flying to England after the war was already lost, you have to go back nearly a decade to a quiet breakthrough that the world simply did not take seriously. The man at the center of this story is a German engineer named Heinrich Focke. You may know half of his name already. He was a co-founder of Focke-Wulf, the company that built some of the most feared fighters of the war. But Focke was pushed out of his own company in the 1930s, and he turned his attention to a problem most engineers thought was a dead end. He wanted to build a machine that could take off straight up, hover in place, and land on a spot no runway could ever serve. In 1936, he did it. His FW-61 lifted off, hovered under full control, and flew. It is widely regarded as the first truly practical helicopter in the world. While the rest of the world was still arguing about whether vertical flight was even possible, a German engineer had already solved it. Over the next few years, his little helicopter set records for speed, altitude, and endurance that no rotorcraft had ever reached. The German national airline, Lufthansa, was impressed enough to order a larger version, a 6-seat transport that could carry passengers without needing an airfield at all. Then the war came, and that civilian transport quietly turned into something military. It became the Drache, the Dragon. On the 3rd of August, 1940, the Fa-223 made its first flight, and it was unlike anything in any air force on Earth. Picture it clearly. A cylindrical fuselage, about 40 feet long, 2 steel outrigger booms stretching out to the sides, and at the end of each one, a 3-bladed rotor nearly 40 feet across. A single radial engine, around 1,000 horsepower, sat in the middle of the body and drove both rotors through long shafts. It could cruise at over 100 miles an hour. It could climb past 23,000 feet, and most importantly, it could lift cargo loads of more than 2,000 pounds and set them down precisely where wheels and runways could never reach. Think about what that meant in 1940. No other nation had anything close. The Drache could resupply a mountain outpost, lift a downed aircraft out of a forest, hover over a ridgeline, perform rescues in terrain that would kill a normal plane. It was, by years, the most advanced flying machine of the entire war. On paper, Germany held a technology that the Allies would not match until well after the fighting was done. So here is the question that haunts the whole story. If the Drache was so far ahead, why did it change absolutely nothing? The answer is a brutal lesson in how wars are actually won, and it has very little to do with genius. The first problem was simple: the factories. As the Drache moved toward real production, Allied bombers were systematically pounding German industry into rubble. The plants that were supposed to build this helicopter were bombed, relocated, bombed again. Every time production was about to ramp up, it was smashed back down. And so a machine that was meant to roll off assembly lines in the hundreds was instead built almost one at a time, by hand, in the gaps between air raids. By the end of the war, after all of it, Germany had managed to build just 20 Drachen. 20. a handful of the most advanced aircraft on the planet, scattered across a collapsing country, far too few to matter. The second problem was time. The Drache arrived exactly when Germany had run out of everything it needed to use it. There was no fuel to spare, no factories left standing, no calm skies to fly in. The Luftwaffe formed a single small helicopter unit, the only one of its kind, a transport squadron that operated the Drache alongside a smaller German helicopter. But by then, the war was a fire moving in one direction, and a few helicopters, however brilliant, could not push back a flood. And yet, even in those final desperate months, the Drache kept proving what it could do. In March of 1945, with Germany falling apart, a single Drache completed an astonishing journey, a cross-country flight covering more than 900 miles, logging over 16 hours in the air and returning safely. For a helicopter in 1945, that was almost unbelievable. It was the kind of range and reliability that the rest of the world's rotorcraft could only dream about. Just weeks earlier, in late February of 1945, another Drache had been ordered into the air on a direct, personal command from Adolf Hitler himself. It was to fly to the besieged city of Danzig on the Baltic coast on a mission whose exact purpose remains murky to this day. The pilot chosen was a lieutenant named Helmut Gerstenhauer, widely considered the finest helicopter pilot the Luftwaffe had. Remember that name, because he is about to fly into the history books. Then, in May of 1945, it all ended. Germany surrendered. When the surrender came, the few surviving Drachen were scattered and exposed. At an airfield in Austria, one German pilot deliberately destroyed his own helicopter rather than let the enemy have it. But two of the machines were captured intact by American forces, and suddenly the Allies were holding something they barely understood: a working German transport helicopter. The Americans wanted to ship the captured aircraft home for study, but there was only room aboard the vessel for one of them. That left the other helicopter, a machine known as the V-14, sitting on the ground, slated to be scrapped. And this is where the British stepped in. The Royal Air Force did not want this thing destroyed. They wanted to study it. But it was sitting in France, and they needed it in England. So, someone made a remarkable decision. Rather than take it apart and haul it across the water, they would simply fly it across the channel under its own power as a helicopter. On the 6th of September, 1945, Helmut Gerstenhauer, the same German ace who had flown for Hitler months before, climbed into the cockpit of the captured Drache with two observers on board, lifted off from Cherbourg on the French coast, and beat his way across the open water toward England. No helicopter had ever crossed the English Channel before. When he set down at the Royal Air Force Base at Beaulieu, the machine that Germany had built in secret, in the ruins, 20 at a time, had just made aviation history in the hands of a defeated Air Force for the benefit of its conqueror. And that is the moment the Allies truly understood what they had captured. Not a curiosity, not a Nazi gimmick, a glimpse of the future of flight, years ahead of anything they had built themselves. But the Drache's story does not end on a triumphant note, and that is exactly why it stays with you. This was a sophisticated machine, and it demanded careful maintenance. Every 25 hours of flight, a critical part of the engine mounting had to be tightened using a special tool. That tool was back in Germany. It was never brought to England. And despite Gerstenhauer's warnings, the test flights continued anyway. On the 3rd of October, 1945, less than a month after its historic crossing, the captured Drache suffered a drive shaft failure in the air and crashed. The only Nazi helicopter ever to cross the channel was destroyed, not by an enemy, not in combat, but by a missing wrench and a warning that went unheeded. So step back and look at the whole arc of it. Germany invented the first practical helicopter in the world. It built the first transport helicopter to reach production. It flew the first helicopter across the English Channel. and it accomplished almost nothing with any of it. The technology was a triumph. The timing was a catastrophe. 20 machines, arriving in a country that was already losing, could not bend the course of the war by a single day. The real legacy of the Drache was not won in the 1940s at all. After the war, its design was studied and rebuilt in France and in Czechoslovakia. Heinrich Focke himself helped develop a French successor. The ideas inside that strange twin-rotor machine flowed straight into the helicopter age that followed, the age of search and rescue, of medical evacuation, of the aircraft that would one day pluck survivors off mountains and rooftops and sinking ships. Germany built the future a few years too early and then lost the war before the future could arrive. So here's what I want to know from you, and I think this one is a real debate. If Germany had built this helicopter by the thousands instead of by the handful, could it actually have changed anything? Or was it always going to be a brilliant machine in a war it could never have saved? Tell me in the comments, because I go back and forth on it myself. And if this is the first time you have ever heard that the Nazis flew a working transport helicopter across the English Channel, do me a quick favor and hit the like button. It honestly does push this story out to more people who would never otherwise know it happened. Because there is a second German helicopter in this story, the small machine that flew beside the Drache in that lonely little squadron. And its own story is even stranger. It was tiny, it was nimble, and it may have served as the only helicopter to ever fly combat missions in the Second World War. That is the next aircraft we are uncovering. Subscribe so you are there when it lands in your feed. Thanks for watching.
Yeah.